For the past 16 years, one man and one man only controlled Hungary, Viktor Orbán. But his sudden historic defeat in the April 2026 election has actually triggered a massive shift in Central European politics. And Hungary's new Prime Minister, Péter Magyar, isn't just looking to fix things at home. He has highly ambitious foreign policy plans that could completely transform the region. Instead of just playing defense in Brussels, Magyar has proposed a disruptive project, a deep political and economic alliance with Austria and other neighboring states of Hungary. Essentially, he wants to put a modernized version of Austria-Hungary back on the map in some form, and this time as a powerful unified voting bloc inside the European Union. But can a 21st century alliance between Vienna and Budapest actually work? Or is this grand vision actually dead on arrival? Let's face it, you can't really build a serious alliance when the region can't even agree on who the real allies and enemies are. Or can you? I'm Jan, this is Prague Pulse, and today we ask, is Péter Magyar actually trying to bring back Austria-Hungary, and in what form that could happen? Now, what may appear to some as this sudden burst of imperial nostalgia is actually very easily understood once you look closely at the political earthquake that shook Budapest last month, and once you understand who Hungary's new leader actually is, of course. But let's take this one step at a time, shall we? Now, as you already know if you watch Prague Pulse, on April 12, 2026, Hungarians went to the polls in a record 80% turnout almost, and Péter Magyar's center-right TISA party won a historic landslide victory. They secured a two-thirds supermajority in the Hungarian parliament of 141 seats out of the total of 199, and this ended the long rule of Viktor Orbán that lasted 16 long years. Now, Magyar immediately went to Brussels after his election, and he had a few goals in his mind. First, he tried to unblock the 18 billion euros that are still frozen in EU funds for allegations of democratic backsliding under the previous government of Orbán. Then he tried to secure additional 16 billion for defense loans, and also to stop the daily migration fines that amount to millions of euros every single day. But while Western capitals celebrated Magyar's victory, essentially thinking that Hungary had suddenly become a passionate advocate for the European project and an avidly liberal island in the middle of Europe, the reality is far more complicated, as is often the case in the region. Now, as we explained in our previous video, definitely do check it out once you're done with this one, despite this reformist veneer, Magyar has always been and still remains a staunch Hungarian nationalist. On the campaign trail, for example, Magyar more or less subtly echoed the longings of many Hungarians for the return of a greater Hungary that was lost after World War I following the Treaty of Trianon. And that treaty, for those who don't know, effectively shrank Hungarian territory significantly, and as a result, some 2 to 3 million ethnic Hungarians still live abroad to this day in the newly established countries like Slovakia, for example. And just to demonstrate how big of an issue the treaty still remains in Hungary today, look at this. In 2020, which was the year of the 100th anniversary of the Treaty of Trianon, over 90% of the Hungarian population still thought that the treaty had been unjust and excessive, a whole 100 years on. And in that context, it's unsurprising, I guess, that any politician who seriously wants to govern Hungary needs to work with the legacy of Trianon somehow. Orbán, for his part, consistently referred to the treaty in disparaging terms and called it a diktat. And Magyar has made the status of those exiled compatriots who are still now forced to live abroad because of how unjust the treaty was a central point in his own campaign. On top of that, he also opposes any weapon shipments to Ukraine, wants a referendum on Ukraine's potential EU accession in the future, and remains tough on immigration. This is all to say, Magyar didn't defeat Orbán because he's a polar opposite of him. No, not by a long shot. He did it because he's a more polished version of Orbán. Yes, he wants to get rid of the systemic corruption of the Orbán era, sure, but at the core, Magyar is actually very similar to Orbán. Again, for details, do check out the recent video. And now before we continue, I have a quick challenge for you. See, my goal is to actually reach the first 1,000 subscribers on this channel before the end of June 2026. And as you probably can see, we are already so close. So if you're enjoying this deep dive and want to help an independent geopolitical channel actually survive the YouTube algorithm, which is becoming more difficult by the minute, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, it takes you literally 1 second, and it genuinely helps me grow. And now let's get back to Hungary. Now that we know the context, where Magyar is coming from, as well as his ideological and nationalist background, his stated goal to quote-unquote put Austria-Hungary back on the map suddenly makes much more sense. But then the question is, how exactly does he want to do that? Well, of course, he doesn't want to create a brand new country in Europe, but what he wants to do instead is to strengthen the already existing regional cooperation mechanisms. Ideally, for example, he'd like to merge the already existing traditional Visegrád Group, which consists of Hungary, Poland, Czechia, and Slovakia, about which we've already talked about in Prague Pulse as well, with different cooperation mechanisms, such as the Slavkov or Austerlitz format, which links Austria, Czechia, and Slovakia. The goal is for them to form a unified lobbying bloc along the Danube River, which would more or less copy the borders of Austria-Hungary, basically. Just look at the map. I guess that to Magyar at least, it sounds logical. The more countries you have cooperating, the more voting power they have within the EU and the more powerful they are in the EU. They can either block what they don't like, or finally, for once, they could try to push for something more positive that they would like to see implemented instead. That's the hypothesis. But of course, the political reality and history is largely standing in the way. Austria, for example, tried to establish a similar regional cooperation project in the early 2000s, just before the region entered the EU actually. But it collapsed because neighbors feared that Vienna was actually trying to restore its old imperial dominance, which, let's face it, it was to an extent. And today, the obstacles would be similar, but maybe even worse. See, the problem for Austria is that it's currently run by a very weak three-party centrist coalition that's been trying to fight off the rise of the right-wing FPÖ, that itself has been dominating the polls for months now. Just take a look. So, while Vienna would probably be happy to cooperate with Budapest on not controversial issues such as trade or border control, because those wouldn't be disputed even by the FPÖ on the right, the fragile coalition simply cannot afford any political risk of joining a bloc that could be perceived by the right as consisting of Eastern European countries and therefore be misused for their campaigns. Simply put, the government in Vienna is currently too weak to attempt any grand scheme integration project. But even if Vienna was on board, the V4 itself is deeply divided. On paper at least, the Visegrád Group, Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary all call for a return of the Visegrád cooperation in some form. But on closer look, this is just an illusion. The V4 is actually deeply fractured. Poland, and I guess now Hungary as well, are on a cautiously pro-EU reform track. Meanwhile, Czechia and Slovakia both have deeply problematic governments with openly pro-Russian conspiracy theorist elements. And on issues such as Ukraine, Poland is NATO's biggest champion of support on the eastern flank, while Magyar, Babiš, and Fico all refuse to send weapons. And the result is that you simply cannot build a functioning alliance when you can't even agree on whether Russia is a partner or an existential threat. And the V4 simply cannot agree on it in its form today. But if this all wasn't enough for you already, the absolute deal breaker is actually the toxic relationship between Hungary and Slovakia. And it centers on the so-called Beneš Decrees, which were post-World War II laws that basically stripped ethnic Germans and Hungarians in former Czechoslovakia of their land and citizenship rights. Basically, we took all the land from the Hungarians and Germans, as well as their citizenship. And now remember that many ethnic Hungarians actually still live in Slovakia as a result of the Treaty of Trianon. Fico's government recently passed a law that makes it a crime punishable by a prison sentence, actually, to publicly question these Beneš Decrees from World War II. Magyar sharply criticized this, both before and after his election. Now, it all came to a head at the end of April, after Magyar's landslide victory. Fico called Magyar up to negotiate critical energy deals between the two countries, like restarting the Druzhba pipeline. And Magyar flatly refused to even discuss it. He basically stated that Hungary would block all bilateral talks between Hungary and Slovakia until Slovakia stopped all future land confiscations and repealed the prison law altogether. Fico's cabinet reacted with fury and called Magyar's demands utter nonsense. So is Péter Magyar bringing back Austria-Hungary in some form? Well, probably not, or at least not anytime soon. While neo-imperial nostalgia surely makes for a great campaign promise, especially in a country still despising the Treaty of Trianon, such as Hungary, and some sort of enhanced cooperation between Austria and Hungary would surely be beneficial, the politics is brutal. You simply cannot build a regional alliance when you're actively torpedoing relations with your closest neighbor over 80-year-old issues. Simply put, to secure his right-wing voters at home, Magyar has chosen nationalist rhetoric over any sort of strategic diplomacy. Because, I guess, the bet was that that's exactly what the voters want to hear. But the problem is that by doing so, he's actually destroyed his own grand foreign policy designs before they could even get off the drawing board. We'll definitely be watching what the future holds in terms of Hungary's integration efforts, be it with Austria or any other country in the region, so if you don't want to miss it, make sure to subscribe and like this video so that you don't miss any of our future content. This has been Jan with Prague Pulse, and see you very soon.